I have a confession to make. I've had Albion Online installed on my computer for the last 9 months, and I have not even booted it up once until last night. Now, this is partly because of a thread over on Reddit that really helped kind of pique some curiosity, especially when we talk about MMORPGs, PvE, PvP, full loot PvP is a hot topic because there's a lot of people with a lot of different opinions. And so in today's video, I do want to talk about my impressions of Albion Online with my limited experience. I'm not going to claim to be some kind of expert. I'm sure that if any questions that I have or any critiques that I have, they might be answered by spending more time with the game, but we are not going to talk about kind of any of that. We're going to talk about kind of just the general positive, but we're going to open up with some of the Reddit thread. This video is going to be kind of done in two parts. The Reddit thread, the full PvP loot discussion, the numbers about Albion Online continuing to hold strong, if not grow, week over week, and ultimately then get into kind of my impressions, my take on the game itself. Now, for those of you who've been following the channel, you know that I'm a controller player, and Albion Online really doesn't kind of blend well with that, at least yet. Maybe we'll continue to dive in and experiment with controllers in this game, but I want to sit down and start with this Reddit thread. I think that's important. And it kicks off with a tweet from Robin Hordes here saying, "Here is the latest player numbers for Albion Online, where players engage in full loot PvP. Still holding strong around the 115,000 players per week mark. Remember, there's a massive portion of the player base that doesn't engage in PvP, so active numbers are actually much higher." And this was shared over on the MMO subreddit, and I'll include a link in the description if you guys just want to go read this thread for yourself. But I do want to highlight a couple of comments because I have some thoughts, especially when it comes to full loot PvP and my experience with it in the past and my hope for it in a way for the future. But Muffin X says, "For a top-down isometric game with cartoony graphics, it shows there is a high demand for full loot PvP MMOs, like it or not. These numbers would be way higher if some AAA game studio released a half-decent game. Heck, MO2 sold more than 100,000 copies." And he's talking about Mortal Online 2. This sub has a hate boner for full loot PvP games for some reason. Now, Square Gold contradicts them, that kind of pushes back on the hate boner aspect, says, "This sub doesn't have a hate boner for full loot. They hate the condescending attitude of full loot PvP fans that crap on anything less than what is it comes to PvP. You can have your full loot PvP games all you want, but recognize that it is still a niche, and that is why there aren't many MMOs that are willing to implement it. Albion is a polished, cross-platform mobile game that can run on anything. Of course, there'll be an audience for it. It's so tiring how everyone has turned themselves into some kind of victim when people disagree with them. And before you say it, this absolutely goes both ways. Everyone takes it way too personally when someone has a different opinion." And then finally, the last comment I want to highlight before we kind of discuss this a little bit says, "It's not really about realism or immersion. The reason I enjoy the kind of full loop PvP game, mostly notably Rust, is that it is higher highs and lower lows. Yeah, losing stuff sucks, but according to the juicy kills feels infinitely more rewarding for me, more than downing a raid boss or killing 12 million bears for a bear killing title." Also, and to add on that, full loop PvP typically means open world PvP, which is one of my favorite things because it's just got much more wide variety in how the interactions play out. So it's kind of like a package deal. And so this is what I want to kind of say on this, because I really honestly think Square Gold kind of hits on a real key point here, is that there is a market, but we should continue to recognize full loot open PvP is a niche within a niche. When we're looking about just in numbers alone, I think that it's great that Albion is having the success that it's having, that the numbers are growing, and that people are willing to try it out. But they're going to be trying it out with some hesitation. There's going to be some trepidation in how they step into a full loop PvP because, like Bugtoll Sale says, yeah, there's higher highs and there's lower lows, and you do want a mix of both, because if all you ever experience the low lows and the low lows, you're going to walk away from it with a very, nasty taste in your mouth, because yeah, it does suck, but you are right. Like if you do get that drop, and the variety in open world is so much better. Now, this is where I tend to kind of run afoul of MMO fans around the world, because when it comes to the genre itself, it really isn't an overall arching community. It really isn't a one-size-fits-all genre. I continue to share my experience as a Final Fantasy XI fan that has really cemented what I view. So that's more sandbox, that's more player-driven economy, that's more social, that's more in terms of that empathy that players end up having for each other, namely because the content in and of itself is not soloable. And that is essentially my experience. But like, there's also the practical reality that people who grew up with that are now, like me, probably a parent, have jobs, have demands, go and grind it out, for 40 to 60 hours, a week at a job maybe you hate. And you're also then sometimes looking for just a little bit more escapism, as opposed to like, a hardcore second life where you have to grind it out for weeks and days on end, etc. But that still is slightly appealing. There still is a market and a niche for that. There is still a community for that. Same thing with full loot open world PvP. Now, I think, and what I personally would love to see, and I cherish, is open world. Seeing people in the open world, being a part of the open world, having activities in the open world. I get the argument and why instance content has become kind of the predefining factor, especially when it comes to theme park games. I get that has become a key aspect because game design wise, you can program for that much easier if you know that you got 4 or 5 or 6 people attacking kind of the boss and they have specific roles and abilities. It makes it simpler, makes it easier, makes it have the ability to turn that content around. And you'll hear me say this time and time again, content is king, right? Having content for people to play tends to keep people playing your game. Before, I guess there wasn't really that many options, but we live in a world of hyperabundance, especially when it comes to games. And the games that people talk about are the games that people have content to play. And they'll consume that content, and then they'll be hungry for it. And that's where I think the future of the MMO specifically is what I call the sand park. It's the blending of the theme park and the sandbox. Theme park is a great introduction, allows you to take a player from A to B to C and allow them to introduce themselves to the world. Sandbox is the invitation of like, now that you've kind of seen the world, what do you want to do in it? And I think and hope that the future is both. But in terms of it though, full loot PvP, that's why one of the things that I would personally really like to see, because I see a lot of talk, like at the end of the day, like when I see these kind of comments, people are frustrated because that's what they want. They want that AAA full loot PvP experience. I just don't think the market has the financials to actually support it because you need that accessibility. That's why I think the solution has to be a server option, right? Like, so you make your game, and let's say it's a PvE game and it's accessible, it's, scalable on multiple platforms, so a lot of people can jump in and play it. And then maybe you have a specialized rule set to appease that aspect. But it's got to come from the passion of the devs. It's got to come from the plan of the devs itself. Stacking on or adding something on to your game after the fact, I don't think really works. And so I think what it ends up being, it's really just a numbers game. It's really just a numbers game. Obviously the chat mentioned Mortal Online 2, and that's going to be a game that struggles. They still have not yet turned on their subscription because they're still trying to keep that going. And hopefully they are successful. I never root against games. I never root against devs. I want everybody to succeed because like game making is insanely risky. It's wild and crazy. And I really hope that, Albion Online continues to grow. And now I'm going to shift because that's kind of the discussion, but I want to talk now about my personal experience with Albion here in 2023. Like I said, I've had this game installed on my PC for well over 9 months. I installed it because I was like, I want to check it out. I've heard things. I wanted to check it out at launch, but I was busy with Final Fantasy 14 at the time. Now I have a little bit more free time, which has been wonderful. And I'm sitting down and playing it. And I have to say, they did a great job with the tutorial. Like, I'm not going to sit here and dog on anything that the game is or is not doing, because I don't have yet enough experience to bring a true critique to the game itself. So generally speaking, if you're looking for any real critique, check back at the channel here in the future. But my experience overall positive. I would love to see controller support. I'm excited that Diablo 4 is going to have controller support baked into it right out of the gate. But when it comes down to it, it felt really relaxing. I like open world. There was tons of players running around. It's a free-to-play game, so you never know if those are bots or not. But the chat in and of itself in the game was moving and grooving. And I worked my way through the tutorial. And I had a really good time. It has interesting ideas and systems that are at play. Leveling up, doing these different things. It's different. And I think that's actually its strength, right? One of the things that we've run into is that it only became safe to try and copy exactly what WoW is doing to its detriment. Like, you would draw in people, they would speak the language, but you could never have enough content because you're always behind the curve. You didn't launch when WoW launched, so you don't have 20 years of content. So how do you get somebody who has invested that much time into WoW offer any kind of content? And the answer has to be, you have to speak a different language. You have to be different enough that it offers something for maybe the player who doesn't enjoy WoW. Maybe, but again, that's where you start to get back into that niching down into some core competencies here. And I think that's what Albion does. It leans into the sandbox, it leans into gathering, it's crafted. The players are the economy. The majority of things are crafted by players. And that's great. I like that. I was enjoying logging and then killing foxes and then fighting enemies and then going back to kind of mining and making these materials. And this is something that I'm like, oh, this feels very, very relaxed. And I think it would be perfect with controllers. Like, I know that a lot of people who are like, no, controllers suck, because they sound off in the comments, and I love them, but we're just going to agree to disagree. Like, being able to have this on Steam Deck and GeForce and to have it in more places. People talk about mobile. I just don't play games on mobile. It's whether it's a mental block or it's something. I just don't like having my phone on me all the time. I don't know if anybody else feels that same way. It feels like my phone is for business and for work, and my wife texts me and it's like, yeah, I don't want my phone. Like, I like to sit down and have like a controller. Like, Switch would be perfect if this game ran on Switch. Like, having this game in more places would be a really interesting thought experiment, because a lot of people, even the guild that I ended up joining is a PvE guild. These things can and do exist, and to offer kind of a world in which that you're not necessarily so restricted is to offer us variety, to offer us the option. And so, honestly, I'm going to keep checking out the game. If you guys want to come and hang out, sometimes we'll stream it. Who knows? But I'm going to plug away at this like I normally do. That's how I play MMOs. I just chip away at them ever so subtly and softly, to at some point you end up looking up and you're like, wow, how have you done all these things? And it's just, a little bit of time here and there sprinkled in. Visually, overall, like, I think it's an accessible visual style. It's not overbearing. It doesn't necessarily mean you need a hard or a strong system to run it. And I think that's the strength of the game. And that's what I saw also some other people in the Reddit thread talking about. It's just accessible. It's able to run, and it can be enjoyed in that fashion. And so, honestly, if you guys are interested in checking it out, I don't know how the monetization yet works. Haven't got that far, but it was free. And that's why I said, like, the weirdest thing about it is I installed this in my system with the intention of playing it. I have kept it up to date each and every time it had a patch, and good for them, good for the devs. It seems a lot of people, at least everybody in chat and everybody that I was talking to, seems to have had a decent experience with Albion, and I think that's the important aspect of to it. So anyway, I just wanted to give you guys my thoughts, talk about this whole niche within the niche aspect of it. And as always, I'd love to know your thoughts. Feel free to sound off below. We'll be talking about a lot of new games, doing a lot of cool things this year. So if you guys enjoy video games, MMOs, action RPGs, multiplayer to a fault, that is me, hands down. Thanks guys for your time. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Hopefully I'll see you next time. But until then, take care.